Chapter 2, 1 year later. Adrian Watts looked helplessly at his own pinched handwriting. He yearned to screw up this sheet as he had the last two, but he couldn't bear the idea of wasting precious paper. With a sigh, he dipped his pen in the inkwell again and continued to write. Dear Sir, I am well aware of the honour of being offered the Duke's scholarship, and under normal circumstances would be delighted to study at the Armsby Academy, but what? How could he adequately explain refusing such an honour even to himself? Royalty sent their children to Amesbury. Some of the greatest minds of the last century had been shaped there. No one had ever been invited so young. He was thinking of turning the honour down. Why? To go to Shaw's? The local academy had not produced a candidate worthy of the Duke's service for 50 years. Of course all that would change with him, but what was he giving up by refusing this honour? Why would he even entertain such a notion? Claire was the answer, of course. Each was the only family the other had. In the last year, Adrian's sister had worked herself ragged to avoid just this kind of separation. She still saw strange places in her scrying bowl, but with his help, she had learned to focus her mind and concentrate on what her instructors wanted her to find. They would no doubt see this as inappropriate training for a young woman, but Adrian could not see why anyone should not pursue any knowledge or skills they were capable of attaining. He had certainly not obeyed the strictures against a boy learning to scry. It was just that, unlike Claire, he seemed to have no potential whatsoever when it came to the learning forbidden to his sex. To him, a bowl of water, a crystal ball, or a naked flame were always water, glass, and fire, no matter how many times he looked at them funny. It was rare that he found something he didn't excel at. Thinking about scrying usually led to him sitting over a bowl of water for half an hour, until he became cross-eyed and gave up. If he hadn't known that restarting his experiments would just be a way of avoiding having to write his note, he would have tried all over again. Without really thinking about it, he let go of the pen, leaving it hovering in the air. Of course, whatever he decided, he and his sister would be separated. If he went to Shaw's Academy, he would at least be able to see her now and then, though. He would also be able to send Echo to see her every day, if the big lizard hadn't got too fat to fly. "How dare you! I just need more of a run-up these days," Echo protested from his corner. "It wouldn't hurt you to ease up on the rats. I'm amazed you can still climb the walls," Adrian shot back. "I can hold many times my own weight on just 1 foot," the gecko replied proudly. "I'm more worried about bricks coming out of the wall," Adrian mocked. Echo stretched out his iridescent body, an impressive 3 foot from snout to tail. "There's nothing wrong with growing bigger," the gecko said with all the confidence of a child who's just discovered he's become the tallest person in class overnight. Adrian was about to answer when his world went dark. Unused to surprises in any form, Adrian experienced a moment of panic before he realized that the hands covering his eyes must belong to his sister. "Get off, you brute!" Adrian struggled to prise his sister's thinner fingers away from his eyes and spared a glare for the reptile preening on the wall when he finally succeeded. "I'm sorry, I don't notice anything but food and loose bricks these days." The gecko bared his sharp teeth in a large reptilian smile. "Familiars are supposed to watch their masters' backs," Adrian accused. "Why? Is there something to eat on yours?" "Why, you—" Adrian made a half-hearted lunge out of his chair, snatched up one of the bald piece of paper and hurled it at the insolent reptile. Quick as a flash, and belying all their talk of his becoming unfit, Echo disappeared into a crack in the ceiling. "He still fits, I don't believe it." Adrian removed his glasses, polishing off any lingering marks left by his sister's fingers. "I'm surprised you still fit through the door yourself, you sloth," Claire teased. "You've been in here since breakfast. Is this how you want to spend your first day of holiday? Why not stay indoors? The weather's rotten. That storm last night was probably the worst we've had in the last 5 years. If you'd bothered to take your head from your books and stick it out of the window, you'd see the sun's out now. What are you doing in here anyway?" Claire asked. A twinge of guilt touched Adrian at the question. He'd not told her that he'd got the scholarship yet. Was that because he didn't want to make her feel guilty that he was giving it up? Or was it because in his heart of hearts he was still thinking of accepting it? He hardly knew himself. He surreptitiously allowed his gaze to flick down to the writing desk. He needn't have worried. His momentary lapse of concentration had caused the pen to fall from the air, and its spilled ink had pooled and obscured most of what he had written. "Oh, I'm sorry, Aid." Claire mistook his interest in the page for upset over the accident. "But if you weren't always showing off—" She only half meant it. Claire was proud of Adrian's ability, and she enjoyed the fact that he could already do what it took some adepts a lifetime of discipline to achieve. "It doesn't look like you've written too much. It won't take you long to do again, will it?" "No, it's fine. Just a piece of paper." Another one. The coldly practical part of him couldn't help but complain. Adrian quickly snatched up the ruined page and threw it into his bin. "So, what do you want then? Apart from stopping me showing off to no one, that is." "I want to do something. Let's go down to the beach. The storm must have tossed up some interesting things. You know we're not supposed to go out that far, Claire. The town limits and not beyond." "You want to swim in the oil slicks and wander past the drunks in the docks, then? You think that's safer?" Claire rebuffed. "No, it's just—" Claire had never had the same regard for the rules, and he couldn't explain his reluctance without looking like a wet blanket. "Just what? You'll be in the academy in a month, leaving me all alone." Claire played her trump card. "Not all alone," Echo protested. "You stay out of this, bug breath. Come on, Adrian, let's go. How many times will we get the chance in the next 4 years?" "All right." Adrian acknowledged defeat with a wistful smile. "If Madam will lead the way, as a graduate I have nothing to lose." He gave her apprentice Platt a playful tug, then felt the spiky hair where his own used to be. All that was like another world now, and the problems of a new one were crowding in too quickly for his liking. "All right, I'll come." Echo pushed his way out of his bolt hole. "But someone better be ready to rub any sand out of my scales." "Always do, don't we, you soft lizard?" Claire said affectionately, leading them out of the room. "And where are you off to in such a hurry, Miss Watts?" Mistress Blakeworthy's sudden appearance in the hallway stole the smile from Claire's face. "Just going to town, ma'am," Claire replied. "Why ever would you need to go into town, Miss Watts?" Blakeworthy asked, enjoying watching Claire squirm. It was not forbidden to go into town during the holidays, as it was during the term, but it was discouraged. The few students who boarded during that time or were without family were expected to ask permission for such an outing. "I also can't imagine why you should need to visit the boys' dormitory before leaving. Who's that with you?" "My brother, actually." Claire resisted the urge to add, "You wicked-minded old bat." On cue, Adrian stepped into the corridor, exuding his usual calm. "Yes, thank you for your concern, Miss Blakeworthy. It's all quite all right. Claire wishes to take me into town to pick up a graduation gift. We were just on our way to get permission." Adrian smiled angelically. "Oh, of course. Well, it sounds quite in order." Mr. Blakeworthy's tone was deceptively pleasant. Checkmate. No doubt she's seething, Claire thought to herself. She would lay money that Blakeworthy had followed her here and waited in the hope of catching her sneaking about with one of the boys. The woman had never accepted that Claire had been allowed to complete her exams and not been held back a year. Blakeworthy had been gunning for her ever since. "Thank you for your permission, Mistress Blakeworthy. It saved us a trip to the office. Now, if there's nothing else we can help you with—" Adrian met the mistress's eye and smiled as if he wasn't perfectly aware that he had robbed her of her last pretext for holding them up. "No, Adrian, thank you for asking. I hope you've got something nice lined up for your brother Claire. It's not every day that a boy receives the Duke's scholarship to Amesbury, especially before he's even turned 17. My congratulations, Adrian." "Thank you, ma'am." Adrian's tone was anything but grateful. "Well, you'd best be off. I don't want to keep you waiting." Mistress Blakeworthy turned and stalked off. "I don't think she took that well, Adrian. Why were you so rude? And what did she mean about a Duke's scholarship?" "Nothing," Adrian answered, struggling to keep calm. "She must have got the wrong end of the stick somewhere along the line. You know I'm going to Shaw's." So much for procrastination, Adrian thought. He'd said it now. The choice he had secretly toyed with was gone. Claire studied her brother's face for a moment. It was a perfect blank. She could infer a lot from that silence. She could have asked the right questions, probably made the right guesses, but if she did, Blakeworthy would have won. Today she wanted to go to the beach with her brother, and if he said he was going to Shaw's, then she would trust him. "Come on, Four Eyes," she said, darting past. "Let's get out of here." She didn't bother to look back. She knew he was right behind her. They ran out through the narrow school gates, under the grimacing gargoyles squatting on the granite walls, and down the wide track that led to the town below. Out in the harbour, steamships belched smoke, while smaller vessels raised grimy white sails. The plumes mixed with the pall from dockside factories to turn last night's retreating storm clouds into a hazy grey shroud, which hung over the soot-smeared town and the black water of the harbour. The siblings did not go that way. Instead, as soon as they were out of sight of the school, they cut down a thin dirt track. They scurried away from these symbols of civilization to run headlong into the low rolling hills of grass, wind-bent trees, and ruffled heather. At last the narrow track widened and became golden as brown earth mixed with the sand of the beach. They ran all the way, enjoying the sunshine, only stopping for fallen branches or to allow Echo to catch up. Occasionally the lizard found a tree high enough to launch himself into the air and soared above them like an iridescent kite. Both siblings laughed freely as the sun broke through the ragged clouds and burned away the shadows of a future that had yet to find them. Their laughter stopped as they neared the shelter of a rocky cove and looked down on a wreck. The ruined ship lay on her side, wedged between sharp rocks. Already the retreating tide had left a mound of golden sand against one side, and the boat's ruined hull had created an unnatural pool. A man floated face down, bobbing with the irregular influx of water. Barrels and ship's implements were scattered over the beach or rolled in the surf. For a second Claire was sure this was the doomed ship from her vision, but then she noticed that while it had been built along the same lines, it was not as big and its hull not as narrow. Only 2 masts, one of them broken, jutted from the splintered deck, and instead of being crimson, the ragged sails flapped midnight black on the thin breeze. "You were right about the storm throwing something interesting onto the beach," Adrian said quietly. "Perhaps we should go back and get somebody." "Not yet. Let's see if there's anyone in need of help before we go running off telling people about this," Adrian said. "If there are any survivors, they'll need more help than we can give them." "If there's anyone still alive by now. There's not much of a rush. From the look of it, the ship's been here for at least one tide. It probably ran aground at the start of the storm. That's 12 hours or more, so any survivors are either dead or gone." "Or guarding the ship," Claire reasoned. Adrian's brow furrowed in concentration. "I don't sense anything down there. And besides, do you really want to let Blakeworthy know that you lied to her, or give up the choicest stuff to some of the drunks in town?" "No, but—" "Let's at least have a look," Adrian urged. "But there's a dead man down there," Claire protested, her eyes locked on the boneless motions of the body inside the ship. "He won't be any less dead if we go away and get help, or if we leave this for someone else to find. This might be our chance to have everything we've dreamed of. If there's something valuable to be found here, we could pay for you to move to Almsby. We could change both our prospects." "So you were offered Almsby?" Claire asked, slightly hurt by the lie. Adrian let out a slow breath. "Yes, I'm sorry. I would have turned it down, and you would never have to know. But just think, if this ship were carrying gold or other valuables, we might not have to." It was the argument of a boy only just turned 16, all daring and no caution. Claire did not share her brother's confidence, but she too was drawn to the mystery of the ship. For 2 orphans, penniless and shunted around by the whims of others since birth, the idea of finding a means for independence, however wishful, had an irresistible draw. It didn't take much more discussion before they were picking their way down the steep rocks, making directly for the ship. Once on the beach, they crossed the warm sand, and when the first thin waves ran over the tips of their shoes, they stopped to examine their prize. Close up, the damage to the hull became clearer. Some timbers were cracked and broken. The great gash below the waterline had likely been caused by the ship's passage across the rocks, but there were many smaller ruptures, some surrounded by scorch marks indicating the ship had been engaged in some kind of conflict. "There you go," Adrian reassured Claire, looking up at the scarred wood. "They won't be hanging around protecting this. They're almost certainly pirates, probably from Britannia. They tried to outrun our coast guard and got caught in the storm. I wonder what treasure might be aboard." "If they were pirates, what does that make us?" Claire asked. "No one's going to return the booty to its rightful owners," Adrian pointed out. "If they're even alive. Better us than the governor or the boys at the dock. He's too rich and they wouldn't know how to spend it." "How noble of us to take on the burden," Claire said. "Enough of the sarcasm. You know you want to see this wreck as much as I do." Adrian stooped to pick up a stout wooden pin from the debris and stepped into the ship's shadow. He waded out until he stood in front of the big hole in the prow. The water lapped at his leather boots, threatening to slop over the top and soak his feet. Claire was already tugging off her sodden sandals and tying them together around the back of her neck. "This pirate gold better pay for new shoes at least," Claire complained, then fell silent at the sight of the dead sailor. Even in the dimness of the cabin, his skin was white, his fingers like pallid eels. Unconsciously, she scooped up her own spar of wood and held it in shaking hands like a talisman against the briny dark. 5 steps past the floating body, the water was deeper, and the darkness was almost complete. Only the dull creak of strained timber and the darkness of the air informed the senses. "How are we going to find this treasure?" Claire asked, looking back to the reassuringly sunlit beach. "Hold on, I have some matches." Adrian fumbled in his pockets. At last he drew forth a book of long matches and struck one against the hull. Yellow light flared fitfully, throwing shadows up into the bulkheads and revealing the lines of neatly packed crates straining against their bindings. From behind one of these crates came a glint of silvery steel. Eyes wide in surprise, Adrian followed the slightly curved blade up to an ornate basket hilt, hanging casually from the hand of a tall and bedraggled man. The buccaneer turned his one good eye on Adrian and raised a finger to his lips before pointing at the water just ahead of him. As if on cue, the water began to boil, and a creature more fish than man thrust a serrated spear at the helpless youth. The wicked bone point would have hit its mark, if the stranger's hand had not become a blur of motion, throwing a thick-bladed knife end over end into the back of the fearsome creature. With a savage snarl, the monster spun, raising the spear for a cast of its own, but another dagger hilt appeared at its throat instead. All this happened in the split second before Adrian felt the match burning his fingers, causing him to drop it, plunging them all into darkness again. The sound of bubbles followed the Piscine corpse as it slid slowly under the water. Adrian stood rigidly still. The scratch left by the bone spearhead dripped unheeded. His boots were definitely full of water now, but he didn't dare to move. His mind sought echo in the gloom. The darkened hole came into sudden silvery focus as he looked out of the gecko's light-sensitive eyes. The man who had so recently saved his life stood loosely, almost seeming to slump against the crates, but he looked intently towards the hatch at the other end of the cabin. The wooden door crashed open to hang on a single groaning hinge, causing Claire to scream. "Adrian, what was that?" Claire shouted. "Let's get out of here!" But even as she started to wade back, 2 spear-wielding humanoid silhouettes appeared in the exit. Thunder roared through the hull as the man near the crates drew and fired a double-barreled pistol. One of the creatures advancing on Claire jerked backwards, most of its head missing. The pistol flared again, briefly illuminating the angular faces and the feral rage of the attackers swarming through the hatch. One of the first to hit the planks crumpled as the bullet tore through its slimy body. There were more coming, clambering over their dead comrade and gibbering with bloodlust. With a grunt of pain, the man rose to meet them. Hopelessly outnumbered, the wounded man should have been the work of seconds for the mass of fish flesh bristling with spears. He'd chosen his spot well, though, and his attackers couldn't get through the narrow gap between the crates without answering to his sword. Adrian watched, slack-jawed, as the man wove his body between the thrusting spears, taking a grim toll on the tide of attackers, all in the near-complete darkness of the hold. Claire's second scream jerked him back to the threat from behind them. Claire managed to fend off the creature's first thrust with her own cudgel. A lucky parry. Claire was struggling to use her unfamiliar weapon effectively in the gloom. The fishmen seemed to have no such problem, and the cruel spear lashed out again with deadly precision. Taking a grip on his own cudgel, Adrian threw the heavy piece of wood as hard as he could. The projectile hit with a satisfying thud, drawing a low grunt from his sister's attacker. The creature turned milky eyes on the empty-handed boy and charged at startling speed. Adrian tried to backpedal, but his boots were heavy and full of water. The pale spearhead lanced towards his face. Then, just before the weapon found its mark, he plunged backwards into the water. Through Echo's eyes, he watched himself fall over the floating body. He felt the gecko's fear and anger as the reptile shrieked a battle cry. Their contact broke as water closed over his head and brine stung his nose. Adrian was left in darkness, trying to untangle himself from the cold body in order to reach the surface and answer the demands of his burning lungs. He sat up, coughing seawater, and the spear point sheared down, spilling cold blood into the churning water. For a moment, Adrian was still, his sleeve pinned to the dead body by the spear's point. The creature started to work its weapon back and forth to free it. That's the problem with barbed weapons, some part of Adrian's mind noted idly. "Adrian!" Claire shouted, bringing her broken spar down on the thing's back and receiving a cuff which sent her sprawling. Adrian's hand felt numbly along the dead man's belt until it closed on the hardness of a dagger hilt. With jerky motions he attempted to draw the weapon, but in his panic the task seemed to take forever. The spearhead slipped free and rose above him. Before it could descend, his attacker gave a cry of pain. Adrian could taste the salty blood in Echo's mouth, feel his sharp little teeth puncturing the briny scales. Like a silverfish flashing in the water, the dagger slipped free of its sheath. He flung the dagger in desperation, but he could tell it was going to miss its mark even as it left his hand. A low hissing chuckle escaped the monster in front of him. It gave a shake, dislodging Echo with a splash, and drew back its arm for a final strike. "Adrian!" Claire called out, struggling to reach him, but nothing could beat the point of the descending spear coming down with enough force to penetrate the dead body and skewer them together forever. Nothing, that is, except the dagger that veered from its natural course and plunged with all the force of Adrian's panic and desperation into the monster's scaled neck. The spear splashed into the water next to Adrian, filling him with relief. His attacker slumped forward, adding more weight to the dead body on top of him. Cold white eyes, luminous even in death, stared glassily into his own. He was distantly aware of the sounds of fighting from deeper in the hold. Claire's hand grasped his shoulder, helping him hold his head above the chill water. It took their combined strength to free him from the tangled bodies. Once he was clear, she drew him unresisting towards the ragged exit in the sunlit beach. The sand clung to his slick hands as he crawled back into the light. He did not look down for fear that it was gore rather than water that made the rough grain stick to him. The sand was dry now, already itchy and uncomfortable. The air smelled heavily of salt, and all at once the desiccated seaweed around the wreck reeked, ripe and rotten in the searing sunlight. It was all he could do to keep from retching. A scream penetrated the confusion that had overcome his senses. Claire's pulling became desperate. Without the water to buoy him up, Adrian was a dead weight. Claire managed to turn him over onto his back so he could see the figure stepping from the cavernous hole in the ship's side. Adrian watched dispassionately as the wounded man limped up the beach towards them, occasionally leaning on his carrion's slick sword. "Watch you, mate." The ragged man clumsily sheathed his sword, gave a wobbly bow, and removed a battered hat. "William Stark, late of the ship Cappadocia, member of the Brotherhood in good standing, and in need of succour, at your service." Without further ceremony, Stark replaced his hat at an angle so that it slightly overlapped his eye patch and keeled forward into the sand. "Me friends call me Bill," he announced to no one in particular before closing his icy blue eye.